I've been asked so many times, how do you go about layering different synth sounds? These are my favourite tricks and techniques.
So let's first of all have a look at some bass instruments. Now, here are 4 bass patches that I just pulled out of the new F9 Mercury P5 collection and layered together. Here's all 4 of them playing together. You can hear we've got quite a lot going on within that, so let's start to break it down. But before we do, I want to move away from the screen and actually talk about this on a piece of paper. One of the things that I'm really keen for you guys to try is to start to visualize sound. So this is a representation of the stereo field. 20 hertz, the lower limit of human hearing at the bottom. 20 kilohertz, treble frequencies right at the top. This central line is the central part of the stereo field, and these other 2 dotted lines are the natural extremes of the stereo spread. Okay, so I've drawn another line here at about 150 hertz, as that's where I feel bass really starts to become important. And actually underneath this line, the further you go down towards the very lowest point, our ability to pinpoint the position of the sound diminishes. And that's why it's often more important to keep everything mono down there. So what we're going to need to do is, what I first want to do is create a solid, very mono core of bass information around there. Then what I want to do is bring another sound in, maybe fill up to about here. And then with some other bass sounds, I'm actually going to go slightly outside of the stereo range. Now this may seem silly because it's a bass sound, but as you can see, I'm not right down here in the bottom. So we've still got that solid mono core from one sound. And we're going to try and inhabit these 3 different places using different sounds. Now we have a kind of visual aid, it's often easier to think about the actual processing that we're going to be applying. Now, if you like the look of this graphic, I will leave a link to a blank version of it underneath this video. Okay, so let's have a look at all of the different layers that I've stacked on top here. Here's our core mono bass. It's coming out of Kontakt because I love the audio engine of Kontakt. It sounds great on these Mercury patches. And here I'm just using a little bit of the built-in Kontakt SSL style EQ. It's at the bottom of the GUI here and means we can easily dial in a little bit more grunt. Now, just to make sure it's completely mono, I have also brought the stereo width all the way down to 0. Now, this is the second patch. It's called Cobalt Bass. Let's have a look. Now, that's probably going to sound quite weird in headphones, and for good reason. It's because I'm processing the middle of the patch and the sides differently. Now, we do have a high-pass filter on the GUI of Kontakt here, but I want to show you this in fairly basic plugin terms. I've used a standard stereo EQ here and actually rolled everything off underneath 43.3 hertz, I think it is there. Now that's a 24 dB per octave slope. Do be aware, even though it shows you that it's all coming off here, there are still some sub-frequencies existing. So this is why then I've then dug in with another EQ, and I have another roll-off at a higher frequency, 74 hertz, but only on the middle part of the sound. So let me just play this through and you'll see what I mean. So that's getting right out of the way of our solid bass. But if I put the EQ now into stereo mode, you'll see that we've still got some frequencies within the stereo spectrum happening lower than that cutoff point. See these here? So there's all this stuff dancing around here that's only happening on the stereo. And that's why this sound might sound odd on headphones. Now let me put the 2 together. And you see what's happening? They are layering together beautifully. Now, obviously, not everybody has a mid-side EQ like this built into your DAWs. That's one of the reasons why I want to demonstrate this in Ableton. But it's a little-known fact that Pro Q3 by FabFilter will do the same. So I'm going to go to the left here, double-click. I'm going to create a nice steep high-pass filter at 24 dB per octave, and I'm going to click on this bit where it says stereo. And there I'm going to select mid. That is doing exactly the same thing. And if you have Pro Q3, this is a fantastic tip to understand. Now, here's our third bass sound called Blaster Bass. Once again, I'm using mid-side EQing, and I've actually brought a high-pass filter up on the mid channel all the way up to, where did we start? It's about 129, so it's really getting through any bass. I've also just tickled the kind of bite section out of it here at about, what's that? It's just under 2 kilohertz. Now, what that's going to do is allow the bite of the simple bass to really come through. So always be aware of which frequency ranges your main sounds are actually taking up. So when you add your additionals, you can layer away from them. I've used the utility plugin then to push it wider than the stereo field, which can sound really strange in isolation. Now, here you can see I've been cheeky and actually added some really low information at 70 hertz, but I'm using a mid-side EQ and editing just the side bands. I've also added some upper mids for some bite, and together we can bring out some of the character of this bass, but keep away from that central core. And right at the top, we've got the 4th bass patch called Miami Vice Bass, and I've used the Pro Q EQ this time to take out nearly all of the middle. Now let me just flip this back into stereo mode and you'll hear the difference. So if I stick that back so it's just EQ in the mids, you'll hear that middle information is still carried forward. So add them all together and what do we get? Now if I just add that back into the track, and then what I'm going to do, every half round I'm going to add another bass sound in, starting with the simple. Now, obviously, when you're compounding bass sounds like that together, you can actually get a lot of the transients hitting each other. So that's why just on the group bus here, I've got a little simple limiter, nothing flash. It's just the stock limiter that comes with Ableton. And you can see it's just digging into the very top of it. Now, with all of those transients building up, that's ever so handy to give us a consistent output. I'm also using the glue compressor as a little bit of a clipper. In soft clip mode, it really does sound fantastic. And as you'll notice here, I'm pushing into it 5.4 dB and then gaining back out -4 dB. So whatever gain that I'm putting in, I'm getting rid of again so that it's nice and balanced, and then just a tiny bit of sidechain compression. Now, there's one element of the layering here that I didn't really mention, and that is all of the sounds that I use there are quite different. And that brings me onto a really serious concept within all of this. You want contrast between the different layers that you're layering up. So let's take some examples. Say one sound is mono, like our simple bass there. Make the next sound in wide stereo. If the first sound is based on a single oscillator, then maybe have the second sound using multiple oscillators detuned against each other. If the principal sound is very percussive, maybe try some sounds with a softer attack. And one really useful tip if you're using analog style synthesis, if you've built a sound mainly on saw waves, then try using pulse width modulated square waves for the second layer. The harmonic structure of the systems are completely different between those two waveforms. Now, that's not to say that you can't layer almost identical sounds together, but you're going to have to approach it differently. Let's go back to our diagram. Now, let's say we've got two nice big brass patches that we really want to make a nice stereo sound out of. Now, they're probably going to take up this kind of room, okay? And if they're quite similar sounds, you can see there is going to be a problem if we just simply overlay them like this. So let's try a slightly different approach. Why don't we take the sounds and restrict them in the stereo image like this? We can take them slightly outside, but you can see one's pan slightly left, one pan slightly right. Now, it's vital that we get these levels right, but let me show you the difference this kind of stacking can make. So our layered bass sound is now playing a new part, and I've got some brass chords on the top from the live rack collection that's inside Mercury P5. Love what it's doing, but I do want to layer it up. And here's our first layer. Now, what I've done here is taken the original patch, Morning Brass, used the utility plugin, and brought the stereo width down, and then taken it off slightly to the left. So if I just play that and mute the second brass layer, then with the second patch called Daytime Brass, I've reversed the stereo position. So width is still taken down, but the balance is now almost identically on the other side. So let me just play just the new patch. Play them both together. They've been very carefully leveled. This is what you get. Now, as long as you're careful with the EQ and the balance and the actual compression maybe on the sounds, then you can get this fantastic width. Now, what's really interesting with the F9 Mercury P5 is that all the sound sources were a Prophet 5, and that has a mono output. So there is always a really solid mono core sound to it, which means panning things around the stereo image is really easy. Now, you can stack them on top of each other, but what I've done here on this third example is borrowed some of the techniques from the bass video. So we're not actually changing the stereo balance now. It is perfectly in the center, but the first sound, Morning Brass, has been brought really mono, including its effects. Now I go to Daytime Brass and I've pushed it right out to super stereo. Add them together. Now, one thing I do want to quickly draw your attention to is that the second sound I've picked in all of these examples does have contrast. Even if I take the processing off, you can see it's got a lot more movement than the original. But for me, when I'm layering sounds, I much prefer this method of kind of bringing things in and then panning them about. Give it a try. I'm hoping it will do the same as it did for me and really open up some of your mixes. One of the DAWs that we have to mention with all of this kind of layering and processing is BitWig, because some of the functionality is absolutely untouched out there. This is one of the projects from Mercury P5 with 3 bass sounds playing. We've got our core simple bass, one on top called Cobalt, the last layer called Spectra. There are all sorts of options to split your content or any channel into different portions. And here I've used the frequency splitter with 4 bands on it. Now here's that processor with all of the bands turned on, but watch me as I turn some of them off. So automatically you're getting into the position where you can just with one plugin really seriously split your sounds into pieces. Not only that, by pressing this button here, you can then add effects just to that one part. So for example, if we take the real top, bring that down a little bit, let's put some reverb just on that. So I'm going to drop that into the effects chain for just that top portion. Bring the delay down a bit. Now let's turn some of the other portions back on. Maybe best to stick it into one of the others. Let's pop it in here. There is another plugin that will split your audio into the mid and side components. And here I'm using some upward compression from the Dynamics plugin into the side. So this is just the side bands of the signal. There's another plugin here that will allow you to split the transients and the body portions of the sounds. So here I can decrease some of the body sections here, or the tones, and increase the transients of just that one patch. I'm sure you'll agree this is unbelievable levels of control from DAW stock plugins. And of course, there are other plugins that will allow you to do that, but to have this built right in, this is one of the things that truly blew me away about BitWig. So I hope this has given you food for thought. Just think, contrast, contrast, contrast between the different sounds. I will do a completely separate video on layering drums because that is a completely different topic. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.